All right, hello everyone. So tonight I am talking with my friend Iago, and we are discussing a very popular topic in the socionics community, at least those ones interested in world leaders and politics, and that is the type of Donald J. Trump. Now, almost everyone in the socionics community has focused on two particular types. Those are the SLE, the ESTP, and SEE, the ESFP. It used to be, at least in the Western socionics community, that everyone saw Trump as the ESTP poster boy. However, I think with an increasing influence of Eastern schools, especially of a school of humanitarian socionics, Victor Galenko, there's been an increasing tendency people to review that typing, to look at Galenko's typing of him as SEE to ESFP. So really, I think and I'm not sure what led you, Iago, to reach your conclusion of ESFP. Maybe it was that, maybe something else. I look forward to finding out from you. As we go through, anyone watching, please feel free to ask any questions of either of us. This is not sort of a targeted debate, it's more of an open discussion. So happy for people to join in. Let's see how it goes. So, Iago, welcome. Um,
Yes, thank you, thank you.
so, just a question: what is it that led you to think SCE for Trump?
Right. So I even made a video about this sort of realization I had a few months ago
Hmm.
because I feel like in the theoretical descriptions or aspects, the SLE and the SEE end up being like very similar. Or when people start giving examples, they're, yeah, a lot of times they're very similar. So
Hmm.
I started looking closer. And it so happened that I just typed a girl because I do typing sessions. So I typed a girl, which I wasn't very certain. And I told her, like, so I might see EIE, but I'm not so sure. So a few days pass, and I just get like uh, yeah, a conclusion. I just immediately think, oh, she's an SLE. She just fitted perfectly in that space, in that gap. I was like I know what I'm seeing, but I don't know where it fits.
Hmm.
So the thing is, I said this is an SLE girl, but it didn't quite fit a lot of the theoretical things I have read. So what I have been observing is that SLEs are normally depicted as a very aggressive type. So I found that with more and more examples I encounter, that's a lot of times not the case.
Hmm.
So, well, I just wanted to throw that out. Like, that's when I started questioning about the idea of the SLE, like the type itself. Uh, right. So, yes, you could think as Trump as a stereotypical SLE, but then I was thinking, like, right, no, the SLE might be a bit more reserved, calm, like maybe mm, funny, FE mobilizing or childish like. So it's not very aggressive. And I found that maybe actually the SEE is the one that is more aggressive. Again, not always, but I feel like the tendency goes towards the SEE. I will start by saying that.
Okay.
So should I go like specifically now to Trump?
Sure, sure. Just one thing there. You came to a realization that the person you're talking to was an SLE in a
Mhm.
way that was different to what you'd come to see SLE described. And the specific way in which you departed from the SLE description is that this type is less aggressive, and that maybe the stereotype of the aggression is more attributable to an SEE. I guess the question I had is, how do you know that that this person was indeed SLE? How did you check your working?
Right. So it was it didn't stay at that because I just arrived to that conclusion, but then it was ongoing because when I met persons that people that were very similar to her, I'm like, okay, it makes sense. So I found like this is a pattern, like, and I found different
Good.
characteristics that I found in different people. And funny enough, I hear that SLE women are very rare. I've met quite a few, but then again, I wouldn't say they're very rude, like they're into heavy sports. Like I
Yeah.
found them to be very artistic. So SE being a lot about image. So in theater, in like well, art, right? Maybe painting, puppets, things like that. Also on the medical field.
Yeah.
Again, that would make sense because of the beta quadrant. So a lot of hierarchies and working on your own role, your own place. Uh, right. And also the aggression. The thing is, yeah, maybe a bit more towards SEE, but I would say in general, uh, I don't think it's an inherent quality of SE base, FE lead or sorry, SE lead or creative, for example. So in general, when I started expecting aggression from SE leads, I started seeing a lot more of SLEs.
Right. Okay. I mean, what I would say is when coming to forming an in-person and experience-led understanding of the types, it is very valuable to discover something about a type and use that to then reflect on similar examples and connect together different patterns. It's how it informs our heuristics. It helps us become better at typing. The other side of it is making sure that those connections and associations we're drawing are
Are correct.
moored in something in some kind of basis. Because one could easily, without that mooring, go off in a totally different direction and have almost category drift, which can then lead to people having completely different understandings of the types. It means we don't have the standardized discipline anymore. It's a hard one. You really do need to have both. It is an important thing to be finding these insights, discovering new nuances. I've had many examples myself where I thought, hang on, what does this tell me about the type? And does it then
Right.
broaden my understanding of how it can manifest? Then I thought, okay, let me just check that based on the criteria of a type, it is still that type. If it's the case that they cannot possibly be any other type, then I go and look at the criteria and think maybe the criteria has been slightly misunderstood somewhere. At which
Yes.
point, then maybe that can be changed, that can be improved. But if I do that, I need to then put in the work to make sense of it. So you come to the conclusion or hypothesis that the SLE is less aggressive in some way than the SEE.
Yes. Maybe it's not
Not
like
hypothesis. It's not
very
you're not coming at this in a strident way. You're offering something interesting to the table for us to discuss and tease out and see what that leads to, which I think is very important. I guess the first thing is to get to a sense of what does this aggression mean? What is the thing that you categorize as aggression that the SLEs you've seen are not demonstrating?
right. So I would say the reason why I attribute aggression more to SEE is because you will see more emotional um, expression, let's say. So more anger. Their anger will come off way stronger. But in general, I wouldn't attribute SE to um, aggression or violence. Mm, right. So I guess without getting too much off topic, but I found there are different. interpretations, which leads us into the different schools, right? How much do they differ? But regardless of school, like you mentioned, when I found like this person that is representative of a few others, maybe even characters,
Mhm.
where does it fit? And I found that it fit uh, quite correctly in, let's say, beta quadra extrovert. So I'm like, okay, and then everything starts making sense. Uh, right. Yeah. Well, I guess that's the end of that thought.
That's right. I mean, what I would say is the thing that you've identified is that SEEs tend to show more greater emotional expression than SLEs. I would wonder about that because if we look at okay, what leads to what decides how much of something a type shows, and I would say if you were to compare the mobilizing function and the demonstrative function, they both are what we call obvious functions, right? They both have what I say is a high energy allocation. Galenko may disagree when we get into model G because it's all he varies the level of energy, but at least in model A, if the function has if the element assigned to the function has a vertness, say extroversion, introversion, that's the same as the overall type, you know that it has a high energy allocation.
Sure. Yes.
So on that basis, one would say that there's the same energy allocation for extroverted ethics and extroverted logic to both the SCE and the SLE. Where it becomes different is that for the SLE, the extroverted logic is not valued, the extroverted ethics is valued, but the extroverted logic is strong and the extroverted ethics is weak, and then it's flipped round for the SCE. Now that
Right.
doesn't mean that it necessarily means that because you're strong extroverted ethics, you will necessarily show more emotional expression. What strong weak would decide, and this is what we find from Bukalov in his differentiation between the two-dimensional functions and the three-dimensional functions, which is basically the line between weak and strong.
Yes.
He said the difference is it's the ability to apply this element, right, to new situations. Whereas if you don't have it as a strong function, it's weak, you can only build normativity. You can only build rules of how to engage based on experience. So you could have a situation where an SLE is every bit as expressive as an SE, at least in the theory, but they will misplay that attempt. And not only will they
Okay.
misplay that attempt, they'll be more driven to try to engage in this area at risk of misplaying because it's attached to their sense of self-worth, because it's something which is valued. Whereas for the SCE, extroverted ethics is something which they do, they have a high energy allocation to do it, but they don't take it seriously. And despite not taking it seriously, they're more effective at using it when they use it, and even come to sort
Yes.
of feel they can fall back on it because they take it for granted.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I would say to contrast SLE and SEE is
Mm,
that, and first I was just like thinking that John Beebe was very right when he said the mobilizing function is childish. But then I also
mm,
found that when reading the School of System Socionics, they agreed that the what
mm.
is it? Super id is child. Yeah, is it correct? Super id. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Right. Mobilizing is super id. Yes. So it's a childish like block. So
Mm,
I'm like, yes. So okay. So we are saying the same thing.
yes, yes.
So FE childish. I found it's uh they can have like a naughty smile, or they can be very they're easy of laughter, but like you were saying about the dimensions, they can struggle with higher complexity FE interactions. They'll just stick to what's nice, playful, I would
I,
say.
I don't. That's not how I'd interpret the childlike in this context.
Okay.
I would say that the key thing here is okay. What makes it childlike? It's a top down view. It has definitely a big kernel of truth, but why? What makes it that way? It's the super id is weak and it's valued, and it is what they call a vital function. I'd say a more of a private function. It's the area of our needs, our aspirations. So it is less sophisticated. And
Yes.
sophistication doesn't necessarily mean amount. It doesn't mean that that, for instance, and this thing that even with the mobilizing rather than the suggestive is that it is something which you still push and try to do. In fact, it's quite
Right.
stubbornly. It's a bit like the leading function, except it's a
Yes,
wannabe.
yes, yes.
It's a wannabe leading function. It is like a teenager who goes off cycling down the road, thinking they can do it, and then they hit the side of a curb and they go flying, and they're in hospital for the next week. It's that sort of thing with the mobilizing function. It is an area which is weak. It's an area which is not sophisticated. It's an area which is still, which someone takes great pride in and tries to really do and even push the envelope in as they get more and more confident, leading to a fall. It is hubris. If we take the idea of a child, I'd think about is the young Icarus flying,
Okay.
ignoring the advice of his father, the wiser Daedalus, flying too close to the sun and then falling. I mean, Daedalus also has a certain amount of hubris in inventing the wings in the first place and mimicking gods. But the idea of getting too close, getting too confident with these things you're given, these wings which might not hold together, and then plunging to your death, it is that sense of hubris which I think is the key thing of the mobilizing function. Now, in that frame, I'd say that one can, if you are as the extroverted ethics and mobilizing function, you can engage in all the complexity and all the intensity of extroverted ethics as a leading function, except you don't make the right, appropriate decisions to the situation,
Yes.
how it's
Okay.
used, which causes it to backfire and fail to land in the way that you may have hoped, leading to
Yes.
almost a reversal of what you were trying to do. You may have tried to maybe lighten the mood. You may have tried to impress, and you end up looking like a buffoon.
Yes. So, uh, connecting this to Trump, I would say where he lacks is not in the, let's call it emotional area department, but rather in the protocols. So I would say an SLE is much familiar with I'm supposed to act this way because I'm standing before this person which has this role, this charge. I would say that's his main area of weakness.
So he's meant to act
Because
this way because of a certain role or charge. Can you just explain a bit more for me, please?
right, so I was watching a clip where, well, the news are making a big fuss like they always do, but about Trump um, walking and not waiting for the Queen,
Mm,
Queen Elizabeth. So they're like making a scandal about it, like oh, he's not doing the appropriate thing. He's not following protocols, which I
mm.
would say is very much ingrained in the uh, SLE and LSI. Like I should act this way. So they may not be comfortable in the emotional area by itself, but they hold on to the protocols. So how to act.
I'm not entirely sure. I would say that we described. the mobilizing function, you agreed with this, the mobilizing function is like a wannabe leading function.
Yes.
Right, okay. If it's and what makes it a wannabe leading function is one, it's valued, right? It has intrinsic value to the person. Two, it is stubborn. And what I mean by stubborn is the person takes their own initiative in it and they are not receptive to external advice on it.
More or less, but yes.
It's I mean the thing which leads to okay, we discussed the mobilizing functions of being hubristic, but at the same time, we've now discussed this idea of it being very important to an SLE to adhere to all the social protocols, to adhere to everything which has been they've been told is what you need to do to come across the right way to people.
I would say not only they have been told, it's like they innately know it. Like they just like Beta Quadra instinctively feels or perceives everyone as above or below, right? So hierarchy in the whole
Yeah,
Beta Quadra.
hierarchy, sure, yes.
So if someone is above me, I should respect that person regardless of how I feel about it.
It depends on that also depends on whether you decide to submit to that said hierarchy.
Yeah, sure. I
You
guess
can think in a
it
hierarchy.
varies. It
Yeah,
varies. Yes.
the key concept is this: you can see things hierarchically. That doesn't necessarily mean that you submit yourself to someone else's hierarchy.
Not necessarily in every instance, I guess. Yes.
Because what I would suggest is, at least for an SLE, this is a type, unlike and very importantly, unlike the LSI, very much unlike the LSI here, all the SLE's stubborn or inert functions, right, are not the ones which are shared with the LSI. They're totally different. So the LSI, I would say, conforms in terms of power dynamics and conforms in terms of social expectation.
Yes, very much.
And I would say that the SLE does not conform. If anything, they see themselves as the shaper of this. And
I would disagree a bit there.
Okay, why?
So because not every SLE, well, that's what I would say. I would say not every SLE views himself as the top. I would say, like I was mentioning before about the arts or theater. There would be an SLE girl who would just have such a profound respect for another. Funny enough, SLE, who was very expert about puppets and how to use your body to communicate things and stuff like that. And I would see in her talking about her just like an absolute respect, like she's authority. Almost like I aspire to be like her. So a very deep respect and in a very implicit way, following protocols. Like I wouldn't dare to contradict her.
I mean, there is the respect given to someone whom they admire, and that's not necessarily about power. It is about a certain amount of intellectual authority, perhaps. It is perhaps a certain amount of moral authority, either. But it's not necessarily a power authority which they submit themselves to. I would agree with you that an SLE does not always think they are at the top. But what I'm saying is that the means by which they work out what the hierarchy actually is not something which they receive from others. It's something which is for them to determine, and they can determine through even a sort of not actual but almost proxy trial by combat. They can almost determine, okay, fine, you are actually stronger than me here. I'll have to
Because
bide my
you've proved
time.
it.
And yeah, it needs to be shown. in a way which is beyond, what people can share with them. I can tell, okay, you beat me here, fine, I accept that. I'm going to bide my time and find the moment I can challenge you again. Because yes, you may be stronger and more dominant now. You may have kicked my ass now, but you just wait. I will be back. Hasta la vista, and I will challenge you again. And that is what I would say is a key feature of an SLE. They look to push the envelope because the actual power dynamics is something which they will want to be decided in the chase, in the combat.
Right. So they want to be involved in it, regardless, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's what they respect. They respect people when they've actually gone toe to toe on something and they've gotten the measure of them in that way. SEEs as well in a different sense. But again, it's when extrovert sensation is leading, you don't let someone else, some social norm, define that for you. That's for you to define yourself. And then it's a question of, can you prove it by being tough enough? And these truths are plain as the noses on their faces.
Yeah, I would say the proving your own worth or value, like you said, by being tough enough. I would say again, it's kind of more of an SEE thing because the SLE, the thing is, I've seen them have this just innate respect for roles, positions. Like it's not because someone has told them; it's just that they inherently view society like that. Like there is someone above me whom I have to respect. Not because someone told them, just because they feel it that way.
I can see where they would reach for positions to justify their own dominance, and they would use those positions very much to that end. But I wouldn't say the key thing is what is the tail wagging the dog or is a dog wagging the tail? The differences that come about from the leading function as opposed to the creative function, I think, is very important here. Um, I mean, it could be that I would expect an LSI very much to almost see it makes the order comes first. The order of the society, the structure, the hierarchy comes first, and they will think, okay, these people are above, and these people
Right.
are below, and therefore this is the action I take. And they'll take, rather than thinking I'm going to challenge this and upset the hierarchy to recreate it the way I want it, they're more likely to say this is the order, and you who are now trying to disrupt that order, I'm going to take action to enforce against. But I say for an SLE, they are by nature a very disruptive type. They have to, and they don't disrupt in the sense of just upending the rules and norms without realizing. It's more they want they get to the top of the hierarchy, they then redefine the hierarchy in their terms, and then they create the order and the structure in a way that consolidates their power. I know that Napoleon has been typed by was typed by Austria as an SE. I think she actually changed her mind on that one. I'm not entirely sure. Don't quote me on that. I see he's a very good example of someone who challenged the existing hierarchy, redefined it. So suddenly he is the emperor, right? He was a sort of a low level noble, right? Very low level noble. He was looked down upon by other nobles, but through his military successes and his ability to command popular appeal, he basically had himself crowned emperor. He took the crown from the Pope. He didn't want to resurrect the issues of the Holy Roman Empire, put it on his head. I am the emperor. And he created Napoleonic Code. He set out the laws and structures that also bolstered his power. It all fell apart. He was eventually removed and exiled once, and then exiled again. But what as I say is the archetypal approach for Nestle, this an especially intelligent one who's capable of going that far. Sometimes it blows up before they even get that far. But is that will to power, I think, needs to be seen as like the predominant thing. The idea of not necessarily running a country or reaching the highest echelon of society, but definitely this idea that if there is something, some sort of advantage, some sort of win I can take, I'm going to put my will against it to get it.
Sure. I've seen Napoleon being typed as EIE. I'm not sure. I couldn't say.
I mean,
But
but I would say even if he is EIE, it's the same things, right? It's the
right,
extroverted,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the extroverted ethics, both in these valued and inert or stubborn positions, so that the real driver is less about about understanding the truth and subjecting oneself to the absolute truth, but more about maximizing one's influence.
Right. The thing is, the only point I'm kind of against is that they are disruptive. I would say most of the time they're not. I would say most of the time they're, like you said, conforming like the LSI. So, but basically, so in cursive temperaments, I'm not very expert about it, but they divide them in the same group, SP, basically.
Yes,
So Kersey says like they're very similar in this and that. Um, and then
but one
MB,
thing I'll say, I have absolutely no reason to give Kiersey any credibility whatsoever.
really, maybe we can discuss about that later. I'm curious. I haven't read much.
I mean,
I
all I say is
scanned the book.
Kiersey has taken a pure dichotomies based approach without any appreciation of
Sure.
the underlying cognitive functions.
Yeah, he rejects the cognitive
Yeah,
functions.
yeah, it's just not it's no longer Jungian. It's got it's got the superficial look of still being Jungian without being Jungian.
Yes, it's basically temperaments, but with MBTI names.
Hmm.
It's
And
really
also the
what it is.
temperaments aren't even coherently defined.
Well, maybe it would be interesting to discuss it in another video.
Sure. I
So,
mean, just
but
a very short one. It's just NFNT. Okay, you group those that way, but then you group the S's as SPSJ rather than SFST because of a
yeah,
silly
yeah, yeah, yeah.
reason about judgment and how it's more apparent in the real world of your sensory than thinking or feeling, which
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I also find that to be a problem, but we can discuss it later. But what I was saying is
sure.
he groups them together. So and then like 16 personalities and this sort of pseudo MBTI community also views them very similar. The
Hmm.
ESFP to the ESTP. So I'm thinking like I have to visualize it in a sense more similar to the ILE in the sense of FE mobilizing
Hmm.
and more closer to the LSI in terms of being just a bit more serious, maybe playful, like I said, FE mobilizing, but a bit more serious than the SEE and a bit more conforming to rules like his quadra does. That's how I like created a distance between the SLE and the SEE.
I'm just not sure why you focus on those particular things to place the SLE between them. Um, I mean, what I would say is, okay, what does the SLE have in common with the LSI? They share the same quadra values. They share the same strengths. They they don't share that much. They don't share the same stubborn and flexible points.
Sure.
They don't share the same asymmetries. Whereas the SLE shares at least one asymmetry, TE versus FI, with the ILE. So if I take that rationale, that can help me to determine, okay, exactly how the SLE is like the LSI and exactly how it's different. And the same way how the SLE is like the ILE or different. It's not, I don't take an
Sure.
impressionistic. The impressionistic is like a starting clue. Then I need to again show my working. So how is an SLE like an ILE? Well, they both have this buffoon effect. Why?
Yes.
But what is the buffoon effect? it is where it is both types that start in the practical, in the factual, how things work. They take that side for granted. They are very intellectually loose and confident, but their fragility is in their social appeal, and especially when they are judged by others for how they've come across. And that,
Yes.
and I said that's where an ILE and SLE very much share something. What the SLE shares with an LSI is that they are both about reaching a sense of intellectual certainty, about stamping their will onto their reality and defining things in a way which supports the idea of this is my will and this is what I want. But the nuances are different in that for the SLE, the will to power comes first, and for the LSI, the setting out and stabilization of reality under absolute truth comes first. And so the extroverted sensation is an enforcement of the truth, for one, whereas for the SLE, the setting down of the rules is the consolidator of the power and influence for the SLE. It's not necessarily even power, it is about one's impact and will in that moment on the situation. It's the I'm taking charge here situation.
Right. So now that you mentioned the vulnerability which SLE shares with ILE, I remember I watched your sort of documentary about Trump. So you laid out an example that you said it was FI polar,
Mm.
in which I disagree because the interviewer asked him, do you have a best friend? Or is there someone you could trust with, let's say, anything? You die tomorrow, who is your most trusted person? And he stops to think about it.
Mm.
He gives like two or three different responses as he goes thinking them through. He says, well, if I think his final answer was, if I had such a friend, I think it wouldn't be appropriate for me, or it wouldn't be maybe I wouldn't want to expose him.
Mm.
So I feel that's a very complex FI reasoning. I've seen that, mm, whatever you call it, the higher or the stronger or the more complex the FI, they tend to be more private, or maybe not so strong, but also like mobilizing FI. They're private. They and also about the relationships. Like they might take their time or think about if they want to share it or not. So I
Mm.
would say that's a complex FI answer, not an FI polar answer.
I mean, I know I interpreted it as it being more of a blind spot in his answer. I would also set it up against, I set it against the background of what success he's had over his personal relationships. And to give some examples, I mean, I actually asked ChatGPT just to give me a summary. I mean, I've gone through this before in the past, but it's useful to have ChatGPT just to back me up. I asked ChatGPT, to what level of success has Trump handled his personal relationships? Just so I'm not approaching it in my own biased way. ChatGPT can also have its own biases. It may have a bit of a Democrat
Yes.
and describe Trump in a more negative way, which it does, but some of these, are still grounded in at least kernels of truth. Summary evaluation, marriages, level of success and key issues. So multiple short-lived marriages marked by infidelity, power imbalance, and emotional distance. Children and family, strategic loyalty from some, Ivanka, Junior, Eric, etc., but limited broader emotional connection. Friendships, early alliances with controversial figures, Cohn, Epstein, few lasting or trust-based relationships. Relational style, dominant, transactional, and self-centered rather than emotionally nurturing.
Well,
So,
I would say that aligns to what I see, not all, but a part of the SEC SE can be like that transactional, self-centered, and very much aligned with the
oh,
SEE
I mean,
because of the TE, because the SEE is the one that has the infantile TE.
they do have a mobilizing extroverted logic, but that should not cramp the style of their introverted ethics. The introverted ethics should come first.
Mm,
That should be an area. When I say come first, I mean that should be the area of strength to them. They should not be start to assert themselves in extroverted logic at the expense of introverted ethics. I know that there is this idea of dom turt loops, which I know the guy came up with it. It makes no sense. You don't increase and grow into your tertiary or mobilizing at the expense of your creative. It's actually the demonstrative that you
yeah,
get.
the loop, or I don't
Yeah,
agree with
that's
any
so
of that.
I'm just sort of preempting, but the point is, an SEE should be able to build, and it depends on the person, right? They can build the transactional relationship if that's all they know they're going to get from that person, but they should also be equally highly capable of building quite genuine, close relationships with people. They should be very good at getting a read of people and knowing exactly which relationship to build to suit the situation. I say that is the skill set of an SCE first and foremost. So if it's the case that Trump tends to almost always have the more transactional relationships, with maybe a few exceptions, that is when it starts to think, hang on, is introverted ethics really the creative function here? Or is it the vulnerable function?
Right. So I would say, and this is another thing that I changed the concept of, because they associate, or I can pinpoint to where, but I know I've read about the SLE being money focused, which again I think is not. That's the third quadrant. So, and you mentioned
Yep.
about the mobilizing function. How can it be like a teenager getting into trouble, right? So it can get us into trouble.
I mean, I would say, okay, money focused, it's not it's what the money represents rather than money focused. That might seem like a nitpick. But what I mean is the gamut quadra is focused on personal independent achievement. Money can be simply a symbol of their personal achievement. I've got lots of money because I've gone out and I've won this myself through my own initiative. But equally, money, especially when used to purchase status symbols, I would say, is where said success is really to elevate one's position in society. And
But I would say there that the value thing is not money. It's the you said status symbol.
yes, and I would
They,
say,
they could they could spend a lot of money on status symbol because they don't value money as much. In But in
oh, wait,
contrast, the third quadrant.
which types are we talking about now?
So beta quadrant can spend a lot of money on status symbols because
Yes,
they don't value the money in itself.
yes,
And I would say it's reasonable to say. I mean, I've seen this, at least in my experience. I'd say it's reasonable to say that, for example, EIE or IEI, they have sort of a discourse like, don't focus on money, spirituality is what's important, focus on God, things like
yep,
this.
yep.
And they all almost say like, they almost find it a little bit repulsive to make something for money.
It also does depend on, there are certain dialectics that happen within the quadra. The IEI, yes, is a type which will say the materialism is something which is off putting. It's more about some sort of deeper spiritual thing. You go to an SLE, which has very weak introverted intuition, they will look to the material, they understand it, they know how to read it, and form their decisions on the basis of it. So an SLE will see their significance in the material way. The IEI won't. They'll look at something far deeper. But I'd say even the SEE and the LIE, I wouldn't say they have some sort of focus on money for the sake of money, because there was a time when there was no money. You know, before the invention of money, there was in a barter culture. It wasn't about money. It's money is a token to a gamma of
Yes,
achievement.
yes, but whatever it currently represents that. So right now is money, but whatever fits that token, I think it is in a big part the aspiration of the third quadrant. So that thing in itself, because that's why the LIE wants to mobilize money, manage money, use money to get more money, to make more money. But so I would say the SLE TE demonstrative, I would say they're good at just knowing how to make money or how to accomplish something. But again, I would say the money is not at all the focus. So again, going back to Trump, I would say Trump is a businessman, first of all. He did a lot of business and then made in transition a bit into politics, but I wouldn't say he's inherently like, although Gulenko calls the SEE the politician, but I would say that all this political involvement tends to be more for second quadra.
I wouldn't agree with the analysis that Trump is a businessman foremost and he just made a little foray into politics. His life has been on the line on at least two occasions, potentially even three occasions for politics. His returning after losing, it seems to be, no, I do not buy that. I would say, yes, he started off in the realm of business. His father, I think, was very much a businessman, and that's it. I would be very surprised if his father decided to then take it off into the political realm. But for Trump, I think business was the launch pad into um, into something far more socialized, a socialized status achievement rather than a personal independent achievement. And if you look at his focus on brand, the shift from simply making money, building buildings, which, he wasn't necessarily, he didn't seem to prioritize that so much in terms of as much as going big, getting more attention, going for the biggest project, which wasn't necessarily the best money maker, putting his name on buildings, doing the grand gestures, the casinos. That was what's really attracted him. It was the sense of glamour. It was the sense of this thing people are going to pay attention to. Then the shift towards television, becoming a TV personality. And then from there, first of all, starting, making his first sort of botched presidential run with the Reform Party, not the UK Reform Party, of course, then actually doing it properly with the Republicans. I think I would say this actually follows a pattern that we'd expect with an SLE of growth from extroverted logic, which I say actually takes more for granted. I've never seen him becoming insufferable with his extroverted logic, and I define that as someone who's insufferable with his empirical knowledge of how things work. Challenging people on, there are more, is more complicated than that. These are the things you have to be aware of, and that's how that works, and that's how that works, and you need to know how that functions and have that experience and that practice and that training to do that well. We don't really get any of that sort of fixation for Trump. He kind of takes the knowledge he has for granted. He won't even, carefully prepare to do as well as he can in the debate scenario. Meanwhile, what he finds himself really focusing on, staying up late watching, is the news talking about him and attacking his reputation. And that is where I think is the area of wounded pride, of fragility. It's in the matter of reputation, defending his street cred. When he gets nasty, it's when someone's attacking his reputation. It's not about, his
His
competence.
image, would you say?
Yes.
Right. So image is about SE base, right? So no
I,
discussion there, I would
I,
say.
I, I wouldn't say image is it just, I think it's more FE. If anything, image image is how people conceive of you. And it's actually, image is something which is separated from this. It's actually, it isn't really SE. Okay, it makes sense in terms of its the power approach, the impact an image can have, the power of brand, but it is something which, at least metaphysically, it's something which operates away from you. Image is not you in the room right now.
Right.
That's
That depiction.
presence. That's presence. Image precedes you. Image is what you hear about someone before you even see them. And people who've never met you, right, who've never met you, have this idea of you. That's image. And I think that is something which is extroverted ethics and introverted intuition. I think the image crafters in chief are the EIE.
Right. I forgot what I was going to say. Hmm. I forgot the point I was going to say.
It's all right. Take your time.
Just a bit. Yeah. Let me. Hmm. Right. You mentioned the debates. So I would say going against protocols, interrupting, speaking when his time is off,
Oh yeah.
cursing, all of that, I would say very much goes against, uh, well, yes, protocols and established behavior norms. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't say he's respecting the the protocol for a debate.
Sure.
That's why he was like admired, I guess, by some people because they
Yep.
envision him like he doesn't follow rules. He goes
Sure.
against them. So this person will do the right thing even against rules. That's
But
the
but
image
be,
that
be,
he
be,
was trying to convey.
but Iago, we've discussed this already. You circle back. We would say the idea of an SLE as a dutiful social rule follower, I don't think is right. I don't think that just because something is valued, right, that it is something that you then conform to what someone else decides. Sure, the rules of the debate were X, Y, Z, but Trump is not necessarily playing by those rules. He could be playing by his own rules. And his rules can be right, I need to win. And if this person can't assert themselves in the situation, then I'm going to talk over them and get my point across. Why does he need to? This idea that, you take an SLE, you say, okay, these are the rules. Okay, yeah, I'll follow all the rules. Why? It's not to his advantage to follow those rules. Why does he need to believe in them? Why are these rules the important ones? And I think here's the other key thing. When it comes to a beta, I don't think this is a type that just accepts any and all rules. I think they are types who very much saying some rules are significant and some rules are not, because actually significance is the key aspect of this quadrant. It's not all accepting. It's actually quite particular and inclined to reject certain things. Otherwise, we wouldn't have revolutionary betas. Betas would never have revolutions. And I'd say the idea of beta being separated from political revolution makes no sense. So that is the core of how we tend to understand them. They're the ones who change the world. Why? Because they said these rules are not for me. These rules are the ones I think are how the world should be run. The whole idea of let's say a communist revolution or the French Revolution is the idea that these rules are corrupt, they are wrong, they are unjust in some way, they are an abuse, and they disadvantage me and exclude me from the conversation. They marginalize me. I'm going to use my will to power to take charge of a situation, and we're going to create the new order in terms of how things are going to run. And that very thing is why there's no reason why an essay like Trump would need to just play by the rules of this debate.
Right. So yes, of course, second quadra can go against rules, break rules, and make a new set of rules, which, being TI creative, he should do. But what I see him do most is just breaking rules. I don't see him like proactively doing a complex set of rules or new system. I just see him tearing the other one down.
I cannot think of a president who has written, signed more executive orders in his first, in the opening months of his second term than Trump. He has definitely set down the rules. It's just very much on his terms. It's not him kowtowing to someone else's rules.
I I might not know how many rules he has made, but what I see from his
I can
public
find out
persona,
the number for you. Hang on.
sure, sure,
Let me look it up.
sure.
ChatGPT is so useful. I love it. Let me know. Okay, which president has of the US has signed the most executive orders? And what is an executive order? This is an order which he likes doing this because he can decide what it is, and no one can stop him. Well, because apart from the courts. No, I'm wrong. Franklin D. Roosevelt actually issued the most executive orders. So, okay, who was the second? Oh, Woodrow Wilson. Okay. How many has Trump done? Okay, it's not telling me yet. Hang on. Okay, in one year, he signed 178 executive orders. No, 220 in his first term, 181 just in like as of July the 31st. Okay, in the first year. So to date, 401. Not quite the thousands. Now here's another thing. When you get to Franklin D. Roosevelt, this is someone I think actually is an SEE. Now, why is that? He is someone who acts without even a conception of how the structures actually are. And that actually leads to them breakdown. If you take, say, Julius Caesar as a similar example, he just came up with something on the spur of the moment. That's what he wanted. He had no patience for any kind of structure. Now, in doing that, that led to Julius Caesar being assassinated. In Franklin D. Roosevelt, he didn't get assassinated, of course. He managed to last for 3 terms. But this is where the rules actually are a blind spot. He just wants something, and almost on a whim, he'll get that through an executive order. For Trump, there was planning. This is what we needed to set out. And it wasn't planning. It was very much a sense of these are the problems we can see. This is the set of executive orders we're going to do in this particular time to have the most impact to create the effects which we want to see. But what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that an SCE won't do that as well. I'm saying that both the SCE and the SLE are not rule complying. It's just that one understands them, can work with them, whereas the other just has no conception of the rules and structures. It's purely pragmatic.
Right. So the thing is here, that I would say that the SLE does have an inherent respect for rules. Sure, any type or any person can do any action at certain given time.
Yes.
But from what I've seen, they do have like an inherent respect for roles. Like, for example, something I've seen them do a lot is like saying, like, oh, doesn't matter that he did something wrong because he's my brother and I will help him because he has this person has this role, a brother. I may not like him, but he's my brother. So there's inherently something I have to respect. That's what I would say. I guess we differ in that way. That
No,
you say the SLE
but I
can just.
think I agree with you that they do have a respect for rules, but it's respect for the right rules. take me for example. I wouldn't say I'm an SLE. Most people agree I'm an ILE. Not all. Some people think I'm an EIE. There's at least one person who thinks I'm an LSE. But most people think ILE. Now, I said to you that I don't hold Keirsey in any credibility. There are rules to Keirsey. Should I respect Keirsey's rules of SJ, SP, and NF? Because I don't. Now, I pick which rules I actually decide to respect. Now, the rules I respect, if I decide, sorry, if I do decide to respect a set of rules, I try to respect all the rules in that set. Once I create a rationale for what I'm going to follow, everything that logically follows from that rationale, I will try to follow. If I'm prevented from following those rules, I experience a great deal of stress because there's contradiction in what I'm doing. But the key thing is I still can pick what the sets of rules are that I decide to follow. I'd even say that an LSI needs to be able to do this. They don't just, they're not just given rules and they follow all rules because the rules can control contradiction.
No, not all rules, but I would say they have like a sense for just universal rules. Let's say rules of nature. That's why also roles, like family roles, like this is my mother, I have to respect her because she's my mother. This is my brother, I have to respect him because he's my brother.
Okay. Have you heard of the idea of human rights being nonsense on stilts?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Have you heard of this? So Jeremy Bentham said this, that human rights are nonsense on stilts.
Nonsense on?
Stilts. It's, when in a circus, in a circus, the person pretends to be freakishly tall and really they're just standing on these sticks.
Yes.
Those are
what do you call them?
Stilts.
Stilts. Okay, yeah.
Right. Okay. So the idea of nonsense on stilts, you've built this thing, right? That's sort of standing up on very shaky ground. It is something which doesn't have a good basis to it. And that was what Jeremy Bentham thought. Why? Because as soon as you come into a situation where human rights are being violated, no one steps in to do anything about it. Look at what's going on in Sudan and Yemen right now with the genocides that happen, the starvation that's happening, right? No one's even talking about that sort of stuff. I mean, some people are, but it's not the main capture of the media because it's not convenient to the narrative. The point is that you can have these rules, but if they're not actually enforced in reality, if there's no weight behind making these rules a fact, an SLE especially is not going to see it as real rules because they're not. In the same way, they can go into a debate and they can win the debate by breaking all the rules. The rules aren't real.
I don't know. I think that's a point where we might just differ because I don't know. I think because they have the complex TI, or at least three-dimensional, they
Yes.
could identify the rules, in a way, play by them, and get an expected outcome relatively to their position.
They can if they see an advantage in doing so.
I would say it's
also,
more of a less.
Here's another thing. Where there are rules which Trump has to be beholden to, he has actually played the game quite well. The amount of times Trump has been sort of threatened with, well, has had impeachment and other things weighed against him, attempts to arrest him, right? He has come out of this with, well, very little harm. He's actually managed to utilize the rules of the United States to his advantage. So I think, again, it comes down to, is it more advantageous to him in that scenario to utilize and manipulate the rules to his advantage? Or is it more advantageous for him in a certain situation just run roughshod over the rules and win anyway? And and he'll make that judgment. But I don't think any of that goes against his strength and valuing of introverted logic. Once we accept the premise that SLEs can choose which sets of rules to follow. My limiter on that, which is why they're not SCEs, and it's not a blind spot, is that once they accept a particular set of rules, they will try to uphold that consistently, almost as a matter of honor. Whereas an SCE, yeah, they'll say this, they'll say that, it'll be this, whatever is in whichever situation seems most pragmatic to them, they will take a different view. And then in doing so, they show no consistency. That is where it's a blind spot. This is why I think with Franklin D. Roosevelt, it was so excessive, the amount of executive orders, because for him, he couldn't really even see the need for the protocol. Just create this, do that, make everything the way he wants, and then change it up when the facts seem different. Which is exactly what he did when it came to trying to find his way out of the Great Depression, although he actually ended up delaying the way out of the Great Depression in doing that.
Right. So now that you mentioned blind spot, the thing is, I do not view the polar, let's see, as a blind spot. And that leads me to another point I wanted to make. Could it be just a difference in definitions? So therefore, it's going to be, you could argue if you could be a different type, but could it be a different type because of different definitions? So different schools.
Yeah. I mean, definitions are crucial to this. What I would argue, though, is that when these different schools of socionics disagree over definitions, frequently it turns out to be, rather than a difference of opinion on definitions, it's a presence of rigor of one side in setting out definitions and an absence of rigor of the other side in setting out the definitions. If I were to invite you to build your alternative definition of the vulnerable function, utilizing all 7 function dichotomies, I'm not sure you'd be prepared to do that. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I'm not saying it's like a personal, it's more that. So the polar is a producing function, producing function. So it sounds weird to say it's blind when it's producing. It's like, in a way, it's like the creative. It's an insecure creative. You do something with it that if it comes out wrong or it receives criticism, then you backtrack to try again. So the polar is not so much a blind spot, but more so like an insecure creative that seeks approval. Yes?
Why would it do that if it's not valued?
Well, because in the cycle of the model A, the information enters through the role, passes to the polar. Yes, then
Yeah.
if positive feedback, if there's positive feedback, then you feel realized, or uh, you have a sense of reassurance to the ego, the leading, and then the creative expels again information. So it enters through the role and exits through the creative.
Yep. So, but again, there's a flow of, you said there's a flow of information, okay, but why, if something is not valued, does one therefore fulfill a need for approval in it?
Right. I'm curious about where the valued or not valued dichotomy came from. Because so I come across the paper Socio or the Foundation of Socionics,
Mm.
and I see that there are what they call Western socionics is like an interpretation of that, but it does differ in us in some things.
I mean, if we don't have a conception of valued and subdued, then we don't have a good basis for all the intertype relationships. okay, let's also put the theory to one side, which is strange of me to say, and let's just look at the empirical evidence on how diversity of teams plays out. Now, teams which are diverse, and then they got different people in those teams, that diversity is helpful when they have different strengths. So when they can offer different things to the table, they can do different things. But if you have diversity of values, if they believe in different things, they think different things are actually important at the end of the day, that leads to conflict, and then the teams work less well. So the basis of a duality, the idea of an ILE and an SEI get on with each other, right? Which is, I think, anyone in socionics would agree with. You'd need, well, apart from maybe Olga Tangerman, I think she actually got a different view. But the ILE and SEI, as an example, any set of duals, any dual pair, what do they share? They don't share in strengths. They don't share in mental vital functions, right? So if you're saying that that value subject isn't important, and actually the vulnerable function is actually kind of valued or important to someone, but kind of fragile, suddenly, why is it that the ILE is pairing with or just any type is pairing with another type that doesn't have this as their mental function and doesn't have a focus on this? And so, first of all, if we discard values subdued, where else does it show up? Because it is a very important concept for understanding how people relate to one another. You'd want it in the model if it weren't already in there. And second, how else do we explain how duality works?
Well, duality is the interaction of this information metabolisms complementing each other. So we have like an information entrance and exit. And in this theory, they go well together. They complement.
Why?
But again, it's a information flow.
Yep.
But any judgment about valuing or not. So first of all, valuing, it's a kind of complex word, right? You've mentioned this, like valued as in reference or as in what?
Yep. Okay. Valuing is where someone sees an intrinsic value in that thing, that element.
Sure. I mean, for example, where I see it very useful is in the quadrants. I would say they, in a way, value uh, this sort of elements uh, and other things extra to the
Yeah.
elements. Uh,
Yeah.
but in itself, the informational flow could happen and you could observe it. But
Okay.
you could maybe, I mean, this is a reflection. I'm not, maybe I
Sure.
could be wrong about this or I'm missing more information, but I would say like you can look at it. Well, that is an act of self-reflection, but you could see it happening and you could reflect on it. Like, oh, this is an area of insecurity. This is what I want others to compliment me about. This is what I want to give to others, etc.
Yeah. I mean, look, we can try to explain the types based on the informational flow, right? But if the informational flow doesn't then lead to an explanations of things which then map to reality, which then explain the intertype relations we want to see, then it's not working. I can just say, okay, there's informational flow going through this information in this way. So what? Now, if you can say, well, in the answer to so what, well, this informational flow is why, and then the SLE and the IEI share the same values, and it's values aligning, which is so important to relationships working well. then I've connected the dot. I've closed the circle. But if you've deprived yourself from your ability to answer it in that way, because now you're saying, no, the vulnerable function is actually where you feel that you need approval, as in suggesting actually it's something which is valued, it breaks the ability of the model to then explain itself in a way which then construes to reality.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is it's the vulnerable or the painful. That's what
Oh,
it means, right?
it's not. It's the
Negative.
thing. It's not painful. That's the thing. I do not believe the vulnerable function is actually painful. What I would say, and this is how I'd explain the phenomenon, okay? Because it's all about the dynamics between the vulnerable and the mobilizing. The mobilizing is a valued function. It's also a stubborn function. It is a place of, again, concerted aspiration, and also a place where you go to, you overextend, you fall flat on your face, you get criticized. What causes you to overextend, fall flat on your face, and get criticized? It is its connection to the vulnerable function. When you engage in extroverted ethics, you interact with a domain. That domain is ethics in general. And it is immobilizing extroverted ethics is synonymous with vulnerable introverted ethics. They are fundamentally connected. You're not doing mobilizing extroverted ethics if you're not also doing vulnerable introverted ethics. So it is when you engage in extrovert ethics and you try to do that thing, you try to elicit that emotional reaction in others with no regard to the personal sensitivities and relationships involved. That's what causes extroverted ethics to fail. That's why it is weak. You cannot have strong extroverted ethics without also having strong introverted ethics. So the vulnerability, it's your open flank by which problems can then occur, which then causes you to feel pain in the things you actually value.
Well, wait, it causes pain in the thing you actually value.
Yes, yes. If an SLE, right, if their relationship falls apart in and of itself, I don't think that's the source of great pain. Certainly not to the
I
extent it
would
would
say it
affect SLE.
is. I would say it is.
I mean, Trump handled his divorce like an absolute boss. He did. I mean, we could talk about it. How he was able to manipulate the law to totally get around, alimony, and make sure he still controlled as much of the assets as possible. And he sort of then walked off and didn't seem to really be affected. It's not introverted ethics where he's experiencing the pain. And when he stays up at night watching the news, talking about him in negative light, that's where he's feeling the pain.
Like, have you seen BoJack Horseman?
No,
Or
maybe
do you
like
know at least the
one little bit, but I wouldn't necessarily reach to a fictional character to support
right?
an argument. But
No, but so I don't remember at what point, but at certain point he says, why does nobody like me? I'm not using the character as a building on theory, but rather like that's something FI vulnerable would say. Why does nobody like me? So it's a very simple, like one dimensional, like why do people not like me? So it's pain on the polar function.
no, I
Yes,
wouldn't say. Okay, but why would
like just
some? Okay, why would some of introverted ethics? Why would introverted ethics be about people liking you? I'd say that's more to do with extroverted ethics.
so it has to do with, like you said, the mobilizing function. But the mobilizing function, mobilizing FE, is about expression of emotions. But the liking or disliking, it's FI. Yes,
It
I
depends.
like
It
you.
depends.
I do not like you.
It depends on how you're defining it. If it's about popularity, It's about extroverted ethics. It's non-person specific. Now, here's the thing. If it's doesn't anyone like me, compared to why doesn't this person whom I not like me back? That's where I think you get to introverted feeling versus extroverted feeling. The SLE and ILE, they court public opinion because it's non-person specific. Whereas when it comes to an ILI or an SLI, they do not care if all these other people, if an ILI doesn't care, all these other people hate them. They're probably idiots. What they do
again?
care,
What type?
the ILI doesn't care if everyone else dislikes them. What they care about is if a particular person whom they have a very strong attachment to reciprocates that. Because that's about their connection with that person. It's particular and it's driven by their sentiments.
Yeah, but then imagine that specific person tells them, oh, I don't think you appreciate me because you don't demonstrate it. That can cause them a lot of pain because it's pain on the FE vulnerable. Like you're
No,
not
no, no.
expressing it.
No,
Do you like me? But you don't express it.
I think that supports my point. The lack of extroverted ethics, where that then strains the introverted ethics, that's when they feel the pain. They don't feel the pain on the vulnerable function, but it allows things in which can affect the things that do hurt. It's like, here's an analogy. Let's say you have a wound, and let's say that wound gets infected. And let's say that infection spreads to the heart and the brain, and the person dies, right? It's not the cause of death. It is not the particular wound. It might be a little nick on a rusty nail, but it's the tetanus then infecting the rest of the body, the really vulnerable bits which really cannot afford to be compromised, that causes the death. That's how I'd see it. The vulnerable function is the weak link, but it isn't what then causes the fundamental parts to feel aggrieved. It's the mobilizing function that then feels aggrieved, and also, by extension, the suggestive function. I can explain my own periods of anguish to you if you like, right? When a relationship with someone who had been quite close closes down, I get upset in the moment, and then I sort of put it behind me quite quickly. And I don't really have to think about the person again. However, if because of a relational issue that causes everyone around me to sort of turn against me, and I start feeling this social rejection, and then I don't feel comfortable in my surroundings because everyone seems to be hating me, that's when I experience the pain and anguish. Because what's happened is I've allowed my blindness in introverted ethics to affect which is where I really feel pain, which is my ability to feel at ease and to feel accepted by everyone around me in introverted sensing and extroverted ethics. The particular relationship with someone and their particular regard for me is not so important. They can go and hide behind a curtain. I don't have to think about them. But if everyone else and the general mood is one which is now turned against me, and I no longer feel as if I'm welcome, that's where I start to feel the pain.
So they're connected. Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Everything is it's all connected at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, it's still pain in the vulnerable function. It's still because rejection is FI. Yes.
Social. So I would not say social rejection is FI.
Attraction or repulsion is FI.
No. Well, when it comes to feelings of shame versus guilt, these are things which I think are very much attached to introverted ethics and extroverted ethics. It's not the SLE and the ILE can sort of cover up the guilt side, the effect on their character, but when they see how they're made to look in front of other people, and that kind of rejection comes out very strongly, that's when the pain happens.
I
Because
would
it's
say
a social rejection.
I would say there's a difference here again, because I do not visualize, and I'm not referring to myself like an author. It's just I do not interpret uh, the the vulnerable as a blind spot.
Okay, and I know, you've made it very clear to me you do not interpret it as a blind spot. But that just because you think that, it doesn't necessarily mean that is the case. What you need to do is make the argument.
So from reading the whole paper, I do not think there's something that points to the vulnerable being a blind spot. It points to being a place of least resistance. So, uh, uh, yes, an area where you walk on what's the phrase? Walking like walking on eggshells.
Yep,
You don't want to mess up.
sure. If you're talking about, I mean, if you don't want to mess up, then I think that's the opposite. I mean, basically, no one's typed correctly. I'm not the same type. If that's the case, the I mean, I'm not. I mean, Julius Caesar can't be an SCE if his vulnerable function is introverted thinking, and he really does not want to mess up in his introverted thinking. He's treading eggshells around it. It becomes everyone's type now has to change by that basis. It just doesn't work. So, okay, fine. You've read texts from which you got the impression of X, Y, Z. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily is not necessarily an argument. It's just how certain people in the past, who we tend to respect, have tried to describe these very complex phenomena. What we need to do in our actions of standing on the shoulders of these giants, not just hiding in their shadow, is to try to explain these complex phenomena in a way that continues to align to reality. And if it doesn't, find better ways of explaining and interpreting this so that it does. Because we have a responsibility to not just continue the theory, however it is, as some holy writ, but improve it because it is a developing theory. And we need good rationales for that.
Right. So that's where I was thinking that one of the points I thought is that I guess it could just be a difference of, let's say, schools, a difference in con definitions,
It could be,
maybe.
but I'd say this: if these are the definitions, then the types themselves are not coherent.
Hmm,
Okay,
meaning,
if we were to dive into all the structures that make allow that conclusion to exist, every single other bit has to similarly be fundamentally changed. Otherwise, it won't fit together. It won't hang together. And if it's the case that the type with that definition of vulnerable function only remains because other parts aren't explored with enough scrutiny, then we don't actually have a functioning typology. We have the illusion of a functioning typology.
so you said only one piece functioning,
No, what I'm saying is,
or can you
okay,
repeat the
okay,
idea?
okay. Socionics is a complex system of different dichotomies, structures interacting with each other to create observable phenomena. So if imagine it as being like a house of cards, and you just moved a card into a different position, you'd expect the entire thing to fall apart. If it doesn't fall apart, it's because you're pretending that the house of cards is still standing, having moved it. You just haven't scrutinized it to see if the other parts, see where the other parts have fallen. You have to, if you change one thing, because everything else depends, because as I said, it's all connected, right? If it's all connected, if you move one part, every other part has to move to compensate. Every single other part in the system.
Well, not necessarily. Like you could have a circuit that some parts work and some don't, and maybe you change one bit that makes the work. It's not because you change one that the
Yeah.
whole thing breaks down.
I mean, look, if you break a circuit, the circuit's broken.
Yes.
You can connect the circuit in some other way, right? Fine, but then the analogy isn't really applying very well because a circuit doesn't work in the same way as a complicated system that rests on the interactions between multiple dichotomies. The point is, you're telling me, okay, it might not work that way. Okay, fine. Go and do the scrutiny and see if you can find any cards on the floor or not. You need, the burden's on you here because you moved something. I'm
Well,
not
I
saying,
wouldn't say I did it.
no, fine, fine, fine. I'm being unfair. You haven't moved something, but someone has presented something in, I'd say, a counterintuitive way, and they have not shown the complete working to justify how it actually does work. Meanwhile, I have been able to set out definitions for all 7 function dichotomies, all 7 information dichotomies, how they interact to create the 15 type dichotomies, which create the phenomena which you know as the 16 types. And by doing that, by having the working, I can show how each bit connects to each other bit, as I've been doing in this conversation. So I've been able to do that sort of working. To change it, you need to do much the same. Or whoever wants to take up that responsibility. Because, if it's a question of Alstra's writing, Alstra can't do it anymore, unfortunately. But someone needs to do it to show how this particular understanding is the one that ought to hold instead of what I'm saying. My view is that in the same way that Alstra came up with ideas and changed her ideas over time because it is a developing theory, right? It wasn't, carved into 2 tablets of stone one day by some sort of deity, right? She came up with different papers. She made changes over time. That is natural. That's to be expected of any model. In the same way, I say if we think that something actually makes more sense if we arrange it this way, and we put in the work to show how everything else connects to it better that way, that should be accepted as better.
Well, I don't know about should,
Well,
but
if you had okay, the better explanation, as defined by the greater explanatory power with fully aligned consistency and minimized extraneousness, that I'd say is the thing which should be accepted as the better explanation. Those are the rules for what makes a better explanation, in my view. You can add more rules, you can dispute the rules, but I think it'd be quite hard to dispute those particular rules. I think they're quite straightforward. If it wins on that basis, it's the better explanation. And the better explanation should be adopted unless we take the view that no, the better explanation should not be adopted. We should stick to something just because.
well, maybe not just because,
Yeah. But then what's the rationale for why?
because it works.
That needs to be shown. Because at the moment we're talking about something which sounds pretty counterintuitive. It's already opened up huge cans of worms in terms of how duality works. So you say because it works, okay, demonstrate.
Yeah, I mean, just mentioning the duality, the dual, it's supposed to be very competent in the other person's vulnerable, like being able to manage it without causing a fuss. Just fixing it, and that's it. Not really speaking much about it, just making it work and feeling the dual comfortable.
Correct.
Not being very critical about it.
Yep, yep. But again, it's a different information flow.
What do you mean?
It's a different flow of information. It's in the vital function rather than the mental function. So
Well,
why is
yes.
so I agree with the phenomenon, absolutely. But again, it's the idea there that this thing which is managed, but no attention is put onto it, right?
I mean, it's not that there's no attention put into it. It's
And
just that
also the key thing, not just no attention, no expectation is put on. That's even the more important thing. It's not that, I'd say SEIs do talk about introverted ethics. There is some attention to it, but there's no expectation on the other person that this thing is important. I think that's what makes the demonstrative so crucial to duality working.
right, just being able to manage that element without causing discomfort in the other person.
Yeah, but just there's no expectation. And so I'm not sure it's even discomfort in the other person. I think it is I think it is no dismay in the other person of the dual's blind spot.
No, what?
No dismay in the person.
Dismay meaning?
Yeah. For instance, supervision. I've heard it described that supervisors are described as constantly sticking needles under the fingernails of their supervisees, right? That's how it's
Right.
sort of described. I don't think that's right. I'd instead say that the supervisor sees the supervisee as defective and loses respect for that person because of that defect.
Right.
Right. And so it's more the dismay and frustration on the part of the supervisor than it is a lack of comfort on the part of a supervisee. However, that dismay and that criticism, of course, then causes issues for the supervisee because now there's a conflict, there's a problem because the supervisor is upset about something. So, when you have instead no such expectation, why is there no such expectation? Because you don't take your demonstrative seriously, but you're very good at it. So you handle it perfectly well in the background, but you do it in a very sort of lackadaisical way because it's not actually that important to you either. It's taken for granted, right? That's why it works, because it's handled, but in a very non-rigid way, because you don't take it seriously and you do not mind that the other person is an utter reprobate in that particular area.
Yes. Okay. So, what was this going to?
Okay,
Or
so going back to the matter of Donald Trump,
yes.
someone who frequently suffers digs at his reputation because of how he unintentionally runs roughshod over the close private personal relationship aspects of life. He is someone who operates very well with a partner or a political ally, take Kellyanne Conway as an example, who can smooth over how he's coming across, socialize that, make that a bit more palatable. In doing so, his introverted ethics blind spot is managed without any judgment from the person who would be his dual. It is not that's not so important to them. Instead, what's important to him is his reputation, and such a person who can sort of re-socialize and remedy his reputation is what's very valuable. Is what an IEI is very good at doing. They're able to smooth over reputational damage, which yes, a leak can sometimes cause by being a bit too abrupt and running roughshod over relationships, and they position that reputation in terms of strategic value, which the SLE is not even thinking about properly. and doesn't really know how to make work.
So even by going by the definition of the vulnerable being a blind spot,
Hmm.
wouldn't it be a wouldn't he be a blind spot to social um, norms, protocols? Like he's constantly portrayed by the media that, oh, he didn't, I don't know, he didn't bow, he left his wife behind, stuff like this.
Yep.
Like why wouldn't he conform to that if he's an SLE? So you say he could break rules that he
Sorry.
doesn't
Well,
agree with,
why?
but
Hang on. Why is so? Sorry, you're saying what are you defining as social norms?
let's say,
As in, what information element are we talking about that social norms falls under? Sorry.
well, TI.
Yeah, I wouldn't say TI is. I mean, okay, there is a connection between FE and TI in terms of social norms, right? That
Mhm.
there are certain structures and expectations, yes, but there's also then the effect of other people, effect on other people from conforming to those rules and structures or not. Now, in Trump's case, we have someone who, in those moments, acts dominantly. He'll walk ahead. He won't compromise on that sort of thing at all. When it comes down to extrovert and sensation, he also needs to accept the particular social rules at play. Now, if he does accept those particular rules at play, he will conform to them. I won't think he will conform to all of them. He does, I would say, conform to a certain amount of respect to Queen Elizabeth based on her position for the British Crown, and he does speak very respectfully of her. There are certain scenarios where he's walked ahead. Fair enough. I wouldn't say that means he isn't trying to show respect in other ways. I don't know.
That whole behavior I would attribute to weak to call it a something TI.
In terms of the protocols of following behind the Queen and all the rest. I mean, keep in mind, he is the President of the United States.
Yes, and as such figure, he should follow some protocols, or at
Well,
least that's the TI
no,
mindset.
no. As the President of the United States, he is the head of state for the United States. He is not. He is not subject to the protocol of the royal crown. He does respect the royals quite a bit because of the glamour of the royal family. There is a respect there, and there's also a genuine love of Britain, which Trump shows, especially because of his mother's background, Scottish. But in terms of again following rules, he is the president of the United States. He is not beholden to following a certain amount behind the Queen. Why should he? His key, he will not compromise his dominance in any situation.
But is it really deliberate?
I don't know
Is it
how
really
much.
like he's thinking, I should do this, but not really because is it really an elaborate process of thinking, or is it just uh, being unaware in the sense that uh, rather than strong or weak,
Well,
I rather use complex or simple
does he know what these
functions.
rules? Okay, does he necessarily know what these rules are in that particular circumstance? Does he know what those rules are? Because if you don't know what the rules are, it's a moot point, right? You can't follow rules you don't know, and you can't. It's not as if an ILE or an SLE is able to magically follow rules which they haven't been told about when those rules are very germane to a particular situation and do not actually, you would only know about them if you had been told them.
Maybe, but I don't think I don't think in general, like there's a constant of him not following the protocol, not following the rules. It's not a deliberate decision. Like, oh, I'm not gonna do this because it's just I'm not.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
just who he constantly
We're
is.
also we also need to discuss: is this really a matter of a code, or is this a matter of social behaviors? Right? You say social norms. There's a certain ability to read the room and blend in somewhat. I wouldn't say that SEEs are social pariahs because they don't understand social norms. That doesn't make much sense to me. Which if you're arguing this is an argument for SE, that isn't making sense. However, where we see SEEs fall foul and then get assassinated, Julius Caesar style, is when they act without any attention to what the processes are for getting, say, their points of view across, for getting laws in place. They don't go through the process of talking to the Senate. They don't go through the process of anything which are the underlying traditions. Julius Caesar, as an example, made himself dictator for life, breaking very much with what was sort of the whole purpose of a Roman Republic. He just didn't really figure it. Hang on, this totally contradicts what we're doing here. And the purpose of a Roman Republic is I'm not meant to be a dictator for life. I just basically created the end of a republic by becoming dictator for life. He didn't even think about that.
Right, because it's a
That's
simple
not,
one-dimensional TI.
yeah, but again, it's not a social norm that's actually broken here. And I would say if it's the case that it is the introverted logic types who are the most aware of social norms, why is it that autistic people, right, are the ones who struggle to follow social norms?
No, let's not get into autism
Sure. But what I'm saying is, if we're willing to accept that, and look, if you look at the research on Simon Baron Cohen, he says strong evidence to suggest that autism occurs from an extremity of systemic quotient over empathizing quotient. Right? What does that mean? Systemizing quotient has to be some connection to introverted logic, systems, structures, right? So the autistic people are very focused on systems and structures at the expense of empathizing quotient, of reading a room, knowing how people are feeling around them and how to adapt to that. That is very much accepted understanding of the tendencies of someone with autism, right?
Would you say only certain types can have autism, or how would I phrase
I,
this question? But
I
how?
would, okay, I don't think that only certain types have autism. But what I would say is that a leaning towards a structural way of thinking at the expense of the ability to read a room does have overlaps with, say, introverted logic and the lack of, say, extroverted ethics, maybe ethics in general. It's logic over ethics. It is a thing focus rather than the person focus. So if the key thing we say is that autistic types don't follow social norms, then it can't be that introverted logic is what is the source of social norms. It's
But
probably
they
something.
could. They could be very rigid about social norms. That's what
Okay,
I didn't
okay.
want to get
Well,
into
no,
autism
no. But
because
that is a very good point. They get almost too rigid about certain social norms. Like, for instance, they learn a rule. Okay, when someone comes over and upset, you must make them a beverage. This is the Sheldon Cooper example, which I know is a fictional example, but it's trying to suggest that they almost elevate the rule at the expense of the social receptiveness. Because social norms aren't really the rules. They are the rules for people who can't just pay attention to the social environment. SEEs do not struggle with social norms, I would say, because they go beyond the rules. They're not even thinking about the rules. They are thinking about, okay, how do I relate to each person? And it doesn't matter, the rules are irrelevant. It's whether my interaction with that person actually works.
Sure.
And
Yes.
so I think we have this, I wouldn't say social norms is actually a set of rules for how you work with people. Because as soon as you adopt a set of rules how you approach people, I think you've missed the point of what causes people to socially stand out or fit in.
But I would say TI does have, well, maybe we could have two types of TI, alpha and beta quadra, but I would say it has inherent rules. Like beta quadra inherently thinks in hierarchies, inherently thinks of I should treat with respect someone who's above me. I would say that's something very inherent that doesn't need to be learned.
Yet they do tend to ascribe a certain order to society. But social norms is not necessarily that. You could, for instance, uphold a hierarchy even at the expense of social norms. Let's say, for instance, you are in a very egalitarian social environment, right? And you start forming certain cliques and elevating yourself above others. Suddenly, you're actually violating the social norms in trying to create your social hierarchy.
Yes, but the hierarchy is what prevails. It is the valued concept.
What do you mean by the hierarchy prevails? As in for them?
Yes, the hierarchy
Fine,
is
fine.
still what is valued.
Sure, but then it's not social
That's
norm.
the
Sure, but then
intrinsic
sure,
rules.
sure, but then social norms are not valued. I've created an example for you where hierarchy and social norms actually are at odds. So if they're at odds, they can't be the same thing.
Well, in let's say that this new hierarchy, there will be another set of social norms.
Mm. Okay, so they've created their own social norms. So they're not, then again, they're not following the protocols of people around them,
Right. You could say there are
which proves my
levels.
point.
There are levels. There are levels. Like I said, there are, let's say, rules of nature and then rules of mankind, rules of whatever, right? There are levels of rules.
Right. What I would say is we've been talking for 2 hours. I get the impression that you might be getting tired. I know that if I continue much longer, I'll also get tired, or I will be tired when I try to wake up early in the morning.
Sure.
Let's put a pin in this one.
Yes. Sounds good. So yeah. Just I saw that you sometimes read questions, or
Yeah, I saw a
can we
question
give
just
like
now.
a
Quick
few
one.
minutes just for questions or
I don't actually have to,
anything else?
because I don't have StreamYard. I can't just put
Oh,
things up anymore. Okay, I can see Winterbird's asking, is Jack saying that TI vulnerable types can't be autistic? I have yet to meet someone who is SEE or IEE who is autistic.
well,
I
I
think
have.
all I'd say is
I
if
have.
okay, if we define autism as, and they're very amorphous definitions of autism, which aren't really definitions anymore. And if you put it into a spectrum, then once again there isn't a start or an end to it. Everyone is varying levels of autistic. So I'm autistic, everyone's autistic if there's a spectrum. Just how
Right.
much are you autistic? I mean, no one becomes actually functional to call someone autistic. You can say they're very autistic or slightly autistic. But if we take a definition, a working definition of autism, which is that someone is left-brained versus right-brained, which I think is still debatable if the hemisphere theory actually holds up. A lot of people are talking about it. I remember I was told in university it doesn't work, that there isn't evidence to support it. But if we hold the view that it does, and that left brain is where you hold a very rigid, fixed, partial view of a situation, rather than a sort of very sort of intuitive whole. So when you ask to draw a tree, you draw like the trunk and some of the branches, but not the overall picture or the overall impression of the tree. If that is if that is left brain thinking and that is what's tied to autism, I'd struggle to conceive of an IE that would operate in that sort of way. If there is an IE that is autistic, then they'd be autistic in a completely different way to the ways in which we think of autism. In which case, are they really autistic anymore? I don't know. I'm not an educational psychologist. I'm a business psychologist. So I don't want to veer too much out of my terrain. I would struggle to think of what that would look like. I've encountered an IEI who was autistic, which I think, okay, there was clearly a hit to their extroverted ethics. But I could see their logic wasn't there either. I didn't have enough time to go into the specific ways in which autism surfaces. But yeah, there we go. I'm quite skeptical at the moment that someone who I would normally see or recognize as autistic, based on what my experience of someone's autistic would be, I've yet to experience someone like that also being an IE or an SEE. But yeah.
Yeah, I've talked about I've talked about this in a few videos, not very in depth, but I've seen that one of the things is that they correlate low emotional expression. So of course, taking in if you would take typology in consideration, you would say that not really, right? You could have an emotional non-expressive or yes, expressive. I was in a therapy group for autistic people, and there would be an SLI, which I interviewed actually in my channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
SLI, IL, not from this group, but I know another ILI. But in that group, there would be an LIE, an EIE, uh, and then IEE as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very interesting to observe all of that.
One thing we'll say, I think one of my sister's friends, I've been told on at least their authority that they are autistic and they are ESE. I've met someone else who's an EIU who says they also have autism. I think that is more likely to be the case than an IE, but I don't know.
More the case for ESE than IEE.
Yes, I'd say so, because at least in ESE values introverted logic, and what normally these ESEs and EIEs, they are slightly more intellectual, perhaps not necessarily, but they can have a certain difficulty in terms of how their emotional expressions then actually land in their environment. Even though they're very much about the emotions, they don't have confidence in their introverted logic, and they have confidence in their expression of their emotions, despite the fact that it doesn't necessarily land right. I don't know of the specifics. I don't know enough to explain exactly how it works yet. It still puzzles me. Personally, I'm just of the view that autism is something which has become ill-defined because there are increasing numbers of people of very different characteristics who are then given the label of autism, which means that diagnostic criteria might be getting a bit fuzzy or inconsistent. Again, I don't know. But yeah, I would struggle to see an IE. I think that would really, I just don't see that making sense anymore. I don't know how that would or could work based on research conducted into autism.
You're sounding You're sounding like when you say that certain Enneagram types don't fit with certain socionics types.
Yep. I think that's for Enneagram to make sense and to have any look, if two things have overlap, if two things describe the same phenomena, then there has to be room for alignment or contradiction. And if it's contradiction, it doesn't work. If they're describing the same phenomena at all, now if the only way that Enneagram, any Enneagram type could be any socionics type, is if they are describing two completely different sets of phenomena.
which they're not, and a lot of people think they are.
Oh, so sorry, you're saying that they're not describing two completely different sets of phenomena.
Right.
So I would say they're describing similar phenomena.
I would say there is definitely overlap.
Right. If there is overlap, if there is any overlap whatsoever, then there must be certain combinations which are impossible.
Yes, yes. In
All
my
right.
view, it's simple as that.
Okay, good. I'm glad we're aligned.
Right. So, any more questions from here?
Talk 2 hours, must be more. Let's see. I haven't seen any other questions. Maybe I did. There's a lot here, but I'm not seeing question marks. No, I think people are just talking amongst themselves now.
Okay.
All right. Iago, it's been a pleasure. I know it's
Right.
not often,
Yes.
it's not necessarily the, the most relaxing experience coming on me and debating someone else's type. But yeah, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yes. Thanks for having me. I hope we can have more of these discussions soon.
All right. Well, thank you everyone tuning in. Thank you, Iago. Take care now.
Thank you. Bye bye.
All right. There we go.
Yes. So, is the live stream off?